Aisha adjusted her backpack on her lap as she sat by the window of the bus, staring at the long stretch of road ahead. Her heart was light, filled with excitement and relief. The past year had been challenging, far from home, living on a tight budget, and navigating the responsibilities of her youth service. But she had made it. She had completed her NYSC, and now, she was finally going home. The bus was packed with passengers, most of them young people like her, graduates returning home after their service year. The atmosphere was lively, filled with conversations about the future. Some talked about job opportunities, others about their experiences in different states. Aisha smiled as she listened. She could relate to their stories. Serving in a state far from home had been tough, but it had also been a learning experience. She had seen a different side of life, met people from diverse backgrounds, and developed a sense of independence she never thought possible. She thought about her parents and how proud they would be to see her again. Their sacrifices had brought her this far. Her father, once a strong man, had grown frail with age, but he never let it show. Her mother had spent endless nights selling vegetables, always ensuring Aisha had enough to survive in school. She had so much to tell them. About the friends she made, the struggles she faced, and the dreams she now carried in her heart. She wanted to find a good job, support her parents, and finally lift them from the struggles they had endured for years. Aisha glanced at her phone. The network signal was weak, but she managed to send a quick message. "On my way home, Mama. I can't wait to see you." She imagined her mother's smile upon receiving the text. Maybe she was already preparing her favorite meal. Maybe her father was sitting outside, waiting to welcome her with a proud nod. The journey had been smooth so far, with occasional stops for passengers to stretch their legs and buy snacks. Aisha bought a bottle of water and a small loaf of bread at the last stop, just to keep herself refreshed. She had learned to be cautious with spending, money was tight, and she needed every naira saved for the future. As the bus continued its journey, the driver increased speed. Aisha noticed but didn't think much of it. Many commercial drivers were always in a hurry, trying to complete as many trips as possible before nightfall. She rested her head against the window, watching the trees and farmlands blur past. The rhythmic motion of the vehicle and the soft hum of conversations around her made her eyelids heavy. She closed her eyes, thinking of home, of her parents, of the moment she would step off the bus and into their warm embrace. Then suddenly, a loud screech. A sharp swerve. The screams of passengers filled the air as the bus lost control. Aisha's eyes flew open just in time to see the road spinning. The bus had veered off the highway. The driver struggled with the wheel, but it was too late. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the small compound of Mr. and Mrs. Adissa. The couple sat outside their modest home, their eyes fixed on the dusty road that led to their gate. It had been a long day, but their hearts were light, filled with anticipation. Their only daughter, Aisha, was finally coming home. Mrs. Adissa had woken up before dawn, unable to sleep from the excitement. She had spent the morning cleaning the house, sweeping every corner, dusting the furniture, and arranging the kitchen with care. The small dining table, usually bare except for a few plates and cups, was now adorned with a freshly ironed tablecloth, and the aroma of jollof rice and fried chicken filled the air. Aisha's favorite meal. Mr. Adissa, a man known for his strict demeanor, was unusually chatty. He sat on the wooden bench outside, his weathered hands tapping rhythmically on his lap. Every few minutes, he would glance at his wife and smile. "She should be here soon," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "She said the bus left early in the morning," Mrs. Adissa replied, glancing at the road again. "I just pray there's no delay." The past year had been the hardest for them. When Aisha left for her youth service, they had worried endlessly about her safety. She had been posted to a distant state, far from home, and they had struggled to send her money for upkeep. Mr. Adissa, a retired civil servant, had used most of his pension to ensure Aisha never lacked anything. Mrs. Adissa, who sold vegetables in the market, had taken extra shifts, often staying late just to make enough for their daughter's needs. But it had all been worth it. Their daughter was now a graduate. A university degree holder. A title neither of them had ever dreamed of having for themselves, but they had fought to make sure Aisha had it. Today was the day she would return, and they would finally celebrate together as a family. A small group of children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the evening air. A neighbor, Mama Chinidu, passed by, pausing at the gate. "Ah, Mama Aisha, is she back?" "Not yet, Mama Chinidu," Mrs. Adissa said, smiling. "But soon. We're just waiting." "A hen. That is good. You people must be very proud. May God bring her home safely." "Amen," Mr. Adissa said, nodding. Time seemed to slow as they waited. The road, usually busy with motorcycles and traders, felt too quiet. Mrs. Adissa checked her phone again. No new messages. She frowned slightly, but she quickly dismissed the unease creeping into her heart. Maybe Aisha's phone battery had died. "She should be here by now," she muttered. Damar. Adissa sighed. "You know how these roads are. Maybe there was traffic." Just then, the sound of an approaching vehicle made them sit up. A motorcycle sped past, followed by a small bus. Hope flashed in Mrs. Adissa's eyes, but neither stopped. Minutes turned to hours. The sun had disappeared completely, replaced by the cold embrace of night. The food on the table remained untouched. The smiles on their faces had begun to fade. Then, finally, her phone rang. Mrs. Adissa grabbed it immediately, a relieved smile breaking across her face. "Aisha," she answered quickly. But the voice on the other end was not her daughter's. It was a deep, unfamiliar voice. "Good evening, Ma," the man said. "Are you Aisha's mother?" Mrs. Adissa's heart stopped. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Yes, I am." "Who is this? Where is my daughter?" There was a brief silence. Then the man spoke again. "I'm very sorry, Ma. There was an accident." The world around her seemed to blur. The phone slipped from her hands. "Aisha, accident?" she whispered, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Mr. Adissa, who had been watching, quickly grabbed the phone. "What are you saying? Where is my daughter?" The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, we need you to come to the hospital." And just like that, the night became the darkest they had ever known. Mrs. Adissa's hands trembled as the phone slipped from her grip, landing on the ground with a dull thud. The words echoed in her mind, refusing to make sense. There was an accident. Her chest tightened, and her vision blurred as she turned to her husband, who had already picked up the phone. His face, usually so composed, had lost all color. "Hello. What are you saying? Where is my daughter?" His voice was firm, but there was a tremor beneath it, fear creeping in like a shadow. The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, please, you need to come to General Hospital." "Which General Hospital?" he barked, standing abruptly. "General Hospital, Oyo, sir." The name of the town hit him like a slap. Oyo was along Aisha's route home. His fingers tightened around the phone. "Is she?" He swallowed hard, unable to complete the question. "Sir, please, just come." The call ended. Silence fell over the small compound. Mrs. Adissa clutched the edge of her wrapper, her breath coming in short gasps. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Adissa turned to her slowly, his hands shaking. "There was an accident." A sharp, wailing cry tore from Mrs. Adissa's lips as she collapsed onto the wooden bench. "No. No, no, no. It's a lie. My Aisha is coming home. She told me. She sent me a message." She grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling frantically to find Aisha's last text. On my way home, Mama. I can't wait to see you. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Get up, Mr. Adissa said suddenly, his voice strained but determined. We need to go. The next moments were a blur. A neighbor, who had been watching from her doorstep, rushed over upon hearing the commotion. Mama Aisha, what happened? Mrs. Adissa could barely find her voice. Aisha, accident, hospital. The neighbor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. God forbid. Let me call my son to take you there. Within minutes, a small car was brought to their gate. Mr. and Mrs. Adissa climbed in, their bodies tense, their hearts pounding. The drive to Oyo felt endless. The road stretched before them, dark and unforgiving. Inside the car, there was no conversation, only heavy breathing, whispered prayers, and silent tears. Mrs. Adissa rocked back and forth, murmuring, God, please. God, please. Not my daughter. Mr. Adissa, usually a man of few words, stared out the window, his lips pressed into a thin line. His mind raced with memories, of little Aisha learning to walk, of her first day at school, of the nights he had stayed awake worrying about her future. The thought of losing her was unbearable. As they neared the hospital, a terrible thought crept into his mind. What if she's gone? He shook his head violently. No. He refused to accept it. His daughter was a fighter. She would survive. She had to survive. The car pulled into the hospital's parking lot, and before it even came to a full stop, Mrs. Adissa flung the door open and ran inside. Where is my daughter? Where is Aisha? She cried, grabbing the arm of a passing nurse. The nurse's expression faltered. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then, a doctor approached them. His face was grave. Are you Aisha Adissa's parents? Yes. Where is she? Is she okay? Mrs. Adissa asked frantically. The doctor hesitated, and in that pause, the world shattered around them. The doctor exhaled deeply, his eyes filled with something Mr. and Mrs. Adissa were too afraid to recognize. Please, sit down, he said gently. No. Mrs. Adissa shook her head violently. Tell me where my daughter is. Where is Aisha? The doctor looked away for a brief second before meeting their eyes again. I'm so sorry. Your daughter didn't survive the accident. The word struck like a thunderbolt. For a moment, the hospital corridor felt too small, the air too thick to breathe. Mrs. Adissa's legs buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the cold floor, her wail piercing through the walls. No. No. It's a lie. She was just coming home. She sent me a message. She clutched her phone as if holding on to the words Aisha had sent would somehow bring her back. Mr. Adissa stood frozen, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. His body trembled, but no tears came. He was a man who had endured suffering, but nothing in life had prepared him for this. Take me to her, he finally said, his voice hoarse. The doctor hesitated but eventually nodded, leading them to a small, dimly lit room. There, on the cold metal table, lay Aisha. Her face was peaceful, as if she were only sleeping. A white sheet covered her body up to her chest. The sight of her, so still, so lifeless, sent another wave of agony crashing over her mother. Aisha, my daughter, please wake up, Mrs. Adissa sobbed, gripping her child's cold hand. Please, you can't leave me. You promised to come home. But there was no answer. No warmth. No heartbeat. Mr. Adissa stepped forward, staring down at the daughter he had worked so hard to raise. His lips trembled as he reached out and gently brushed her hair away from her forehead. You were supposed to bury me, Aisha, not the other way around, he whispered. A single tear finally escaped his eye. The doctor gave them space, stepping aside as the weight of grief settled in the room. Outside, the night was quiet. The world continued moving, oblivious to the pain tearing through the hearts of two parents who had lost everything in an instant. The next morning, the food Mrs. Adissa had prepared remained untouched. The little house, once filled with laughter and warmth, felt empty. Neighbors came to mourn with them, but no words could soothe their pain. A chair had been placed outside for Aisha, her special seat, where she was supposed to sit and celebrate her return. But now, it remained empty. Her journey had ended too soon. And so had the light in her parents' eyes.